Hello, this is Mike. Welcome to another episode of 5 Minute Mythology. It's still March, it's still Women's History Month, and I'm still drinking this Imperial Stout with cherry coca and vanilla from Land Grant Brewing, which is delicious. And on those notes, let's do another myth or legend involving a famous woman. This is the legend of Pope Joan. So we all know the Catholic Church. They've got God and monks and fancy robes and misogyny and dudes running around in different types of hats, and the guy with the biggest hat is the king, and he calls himself the Pope, and he lives in the Vatican City in the middle of Rome. Pretty much, that's the Catholic Church. If you live on this planet, you've probably heard about them at some point in your life. Anyways, between 855 and 857, the person who was actually wearing the giant Pope hat, which was their king, was actually female, named Joan. Now, how did this happen? In at this point, 850-year-long tradition that was solely held by men? Well, this is that story. So the story of Pope Joan is pretty simple. She was a woman. She, at the behest of her lover, would disguise herself as a man. She was very learned and talented in a lot of things. She ends up in the Catholic Church. She rises through the hierarchy, eventually getting herself elected Pope in 855. Now, the whole time she's going by the name John, where in some accounts she's referred to as Pope John VII. So when they elected her, they actually assumed that she was a dude. So she reigns as Pope for 2 years, and eventually her secret comes out because she gets pregnant. Well, now while she's able to hide the pregnancy, for the most part, she's not able to hide the birth, which happened during procession she was given. Now, it's said that she died shortly after this. It could have been a result of the birth, or a lot of people think it was a result of a subsequent murder, because when you just found out that your dude pope is a chick, in that medieval mindset, they were probably freaking out and discussing an assassination attempt literally the next day, if not while she was giving birth. The legend goes on to state that after this, that all these future processions that the church had would avoid that particular spot where this birth happened, and eventually she was removed from the official list of popes. After which they initiated a ritual to ensure that all future popes were male, which meant that the Pope dude had to sit on this seatless chair while some monks or whatever had to reach up and tug at his junk. So yeah, even as far back as the 800s, dudes tugging on each other's junk, which seems to be one of their longest standing traditions. And to give more credence to this idea of this female pope, there was actually a bust crafted that sat in the Siena Cathedral up until the year 1600, when a bunch of angry misogynistic protesters came in and basically destroyed it. Now, the earliest accounts of Pope Joan actually come to us about 400 years after she reigned in the 13th century. The most popular of these accounts alleges that her name was John Anglicus of Mainz, and that she reigned in the 9th century, and that she entered the church to follow her lover, subsequently rising up the hat ranks and getting the big Pope hat. And this is a legend which is widely believed in the mainstream up until about the 1600s, when scholars start disputing it. Particularly, they are disputing the idea that if there was this female pope, how come there were no written accounts of her until this guy writes these famous accounts post 1250. And after that, people start picking it apart, and, they decide, oh, well, it's just a myth. And even many scholars today do see it as a fantasy or a fiction. They base that on accounts from the church from that time period in the 9th century that kind of contradict a lot of the story. However, there are some scholars today which believe that if a female pope did arise at some point, a more plausible time frame would have been between the years of 1086 and 1108. This was a kind of chaotic chaotic time in the church where there were several of these anti-popes coming up, and it could be possible that one of these anti-popes was a female who somehow rose amongst the ranks of the church, which really isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. I mean, history is littered with women who pass themselves off as men and epic stories, as warriors, as pirates, and maybe even as church officials and the Pope. And I think a reason why this legend of this female Pope becomes so prominent throughout the Middle Ages and the early Renaissance period is because it's a time where social mobility amongst women was pretty much non-existent. A woman's place in society was generally at the bottom. So the idea of having this woman rise up, become the Pope, I mean, that's a pretty inspirational and awesome story if you're a woman living during that time. And to be honest, it's a pretty awesome and influential story today. And on that note, I think that's where I'll end this episode. Once again, this is Mike. Meet us here every Tuesday for 5-Minute Mythologies and every other Thursday for Urban Legends and Conspiracies.